Hello, welcome to another video. In this video I'm going to have a bit of a chat to you while we watch me paint together. I paint two of the same picture in this particular video, but I paint them both in different kind of colour palettes. So I always like to tone my page with burnt sienna. I find it's a really good way to kind of add warmth to and unity to your painting. So I start by drawing the hills and then I block in the tree, the main tree, which is really just at this stage like a giant triangle. My plan with this, I think, is to block in a large mass and then I will kind of cut into that with my sky colour and the colour of the hills. So I'm just drawing in another little stand of trees. I'm realising now this is quite a similar composition to my last one, but just kind of like smaller and the tree is more pronounced. But I guess we all kind of have that thing that we like to paint, and for me it's at the moment hills and trees and skies. So we're gonna go with it. So I'll start with the sky. I'm gonna keep it like light, and then I think about blocking in the rest of my shapes. So just blocking in the distant mountain, which my base colour is like this blue. So this is a mix of Ultramarine Blue and Cerulean Blue and white and probably a little bit of lilac. And I decided it was too dark, so we went lighter again. And I think this one, I put a little bit more lilac in. So I used the same mix as I did for the hills in the background, and I just add a bit of yellow and white to lighten it. So the hills are always darker because they're a slanted surface. So with that same mix, I add a little bit of yellow ochre just in layers here. I added a bit of cerulean blue here but decided it was too blue, so I added some more yellow and fixed that one up. So I add it in stages, the yellow, and just slowly warm up the tone. Yellow is the first colour to drop out when it comes to atmospheric perspective and distance. So the brightest yellows are going to be right in front of your face in terms of the painting and the drawing. If you're looking out, you know, at a vast landscape, you'll notice the further away, the less yellow. And that's a really, really key to pushing distance and atmosphere and depth in your painting. So same mix again, just less yellow and less white. And then I've decided to knock in some of the trees on the tops of the hill. I didn't really think about how this raised the horizon line when I did it, and it probably in the end meant that the horizon line was a little closer to the middle of the page than I would typically like. But again, this was more of a colour study. I'm not thinking too much about composition. I thought a little bit about it, but I was more so just trying to get my understanding of colour down, and I'm personally really, really happy with how these ones turned out. The tree didn't really have the complexity and the depth to it that I would have liked. It was a bit too purple, and then the green was just a bit too stark. Here I am mixing my dark tone that I'm going to block this tree in. I realised after I painted it that I was way too broad with the base of the tree. Like, this is a eucalyptus tree. The trunk is going to be skinny, and the canopy is quite broad. So I went way too wide with the base of the tree, like the trunk of the tree. But in the end, I cut into it, and I'm actually quite happy with the process I used to get to this end result with this tree. So bear with me, it will get better. I really kind of argue with that kind of stand of trees in the back quite a lot, trying to get my colour and trying to get like the distance, and I think you'll see me kind of going back and forth with that particular stand of trees to the right over and over and over and over and over and over again throughout the entire process. But again, hopefully it turns out okay. Now it's time to start getting some thicker paint in. So I've done my thin washes and kind of established my main masses and kind of colour blocks, and now is the fun part where I start to bring in some thicker paint and carve my shapes out. So my favourite part of painting honestly has got to be punching those sky holes into the tree. I just love how the thick kind of blue paint all blends together, but you can still see the brush strokes. It just makes me really happy. I feel like having texture in your sky creates a sense of atmosphere, and I just love how that looks and how that feels to paint. You'll see here I kind of lowered the horizon line a little bit again with my sky. I'm thinking that I need to try painting with kind of different shaped brushes, but I love the flat brushes so much. I think I just really like how graphic the strokes are. I don't know, there's just something so satisfying about it, so I can't really see myself graduating to different types of brushes too often. I use a little round brush for detail, but that's about it really. I did just buy a filbert brush by Roymac, which is one of my favourite types of brushes, so you'll probably see that make some appearances, but other than that it's mostly just flat brushes for me. They are my weapon of choice. So at this point I decided to add some shadows into the trees on the hill. I thought that the hills needed a little more contrast, so this is kind of a grey purple. I think it's a mix of crimson and lilac, yellow ochre, and probably a little ultramarine blue, and lots and lots and lots of white. I bought this new brush with some vouchers that I got for Christmas. It's a Raphael Imitation Kolinsky No. 4, and I am loving what it does for my artwork. I used it for the first time today, but I think it's kind of the brush that's been missing from my arsenal, and I had a lot more fun with these paintings than I've had with the others. Again, arguing with this stand of trees, deciding that it was blending too much into the rest of the landscape, so I darkened it. Just look at the marks I can get and the control I have. It's just, it's so good. Love it. I think it's my new favourite. So here I'm using yellow mixed with lilac to start to describe some of the highlights in the hills and like the kind of far midground. The thing that I'm trying to remember is when it comes to the background and the midground, your contrast is going between, the tones in that area is going to be less intense than a contrast of your focal area or the foreground. I'm also kind of bringing in more yellow as I get towards the viewer, kind of towards to where we would be if we were looking at this scene. While it's really important to kind of have specific value ranges for specific areas, it's also really important to carry your colours through your entire painting. So you'll see sometimes I do it towards the end. I think in the second painting there's this blue tone that I use to add shadows into the back trees, but I use that exact same blue to then add highlights to the or midtones to the foreground trees, so that value doesn't change, but the context that it's in, because of the range of values and colors that it's surrounded by in each area of the painting, the context of that color changes and it goes from being a shadow to a kind of midtone or highlight. So you'll see at this point, I've added a little bit more colour variety in the foreground and background, just to kind of add interest. And I've cut a bit more into the tree. So I've been mindful of using the tones of the grasses and the hills and the sky and my placement of those within the shape of the tree to make it look like you're seeing straight through, you know, gaps in the branches. This part's got to be just my favourite part, and I think I've talked about it so many times, but just cutting these sky holes into the tree and really kind of integrating it as a part of the painting is just so much fun. But the only problem is I got a bit carried away with it with this particular painting, and looking at the finished piece, I feel like the separation of the shapes of the sky through the foliage and the size of each kind of hole, they're all very similar, and I feel like it looks a bit too lacy, a little bit too intentional, maybe not quite as believable as the tree that we paint in the second painting. So coming in here with some of that Dyke Brown mixed with Ultramarine Blue, Crimson, a tiny bit of yellow ochre just to warm it up a little bit to knock in the shadows of the trunk and some of the branches. I paint some of the branches in this dark colour, other branches in a lighter blue colour to kind of create depth and look like there's actually atmospheric perspective within the tree itself, separating, you know, branches that are closer to you from branches that are further away. The way that both of these trees came out, besides the fact that the foliage in this one is kind of a little bit too lacy or I guess homogeneous in the end, I really feel like I have conveyed eucalyptus tree, like gum tree, in both of them, more so in the second one. I feel like I keep talking about the second painting like I prefer it. I actually prefer the colours in this one, but I prefer the execution of the tree in the second one. So if I could kind of mash the two of them together, I'll be really happy. So at this point I decided to add my final highlights, and this was pretty much straight white, which I don't do often, but I feel like it really lent itself to these paintings and kind of the bits of bark that are kind of peeling off the eucalyptus trees and catching the light and getting those really bright highlights. I feel like this really kind of made the tree really punchy and I feel like it made it a lot more believable in the landscape. It really stands, you know, front and center. And we're on to our second painting. I'll speed through the drawing because it's literally the same drawing that I did for the other painting. It's just going to be painted with different colours. So in this one I decided I really wanted to lean more towards greens and blues. So to make my sky stand out against all of the blues that were going to be in kind of the distant hills, I actually made it more of a green. So it's kind of cerulean blue mixed with lemon yellow, a little bit of yellow ochre, and loads and loads and loads of white. And you'll see the difference in the two blues. So the one up the top in my top painting is a lot cooler, and the one down the bottom here is a lot warmer, but it's just going to work much better with the colors that I'm going to put in, you know, the landscape itself. I think all up with both of these paintings, I probably spent about, I don't know, 2 hours all up. Oh, not even that. I probably spent like an hour and a half on both altogether. And this second painting came together a lot quicker, and that's probably because I was already familiar with the subject because I'd painted the one before it, and I already knew the mistakes I'd made in the top one, and I wasn't going to remake those same mistakes in the bottom one. I find like this is a really good activity when I don't really know what to paint, but I want to paint, you know, multiple pictures. Changing the colours can change the time of day in the painting, or it can just change the whole mood, and I think it's a really fun experiment. The sky is quite warm, so that's mostly cerulean blue, which is more of a yellow blue. And then I switched to ultramarine blue for those mountains in the background. So in the grasses here, I've gone with more of a blue-green and then moving towards a yellow-green instead of the, you know, real greys and purpley yellows that I had in the previous painting. So I'm blocking in this tree with a slightly cooler version of the mix that I used in the upper painting, which is just your Dyke Brown, Ultramarine Blue and Crimson, and a little bit of yellow ochre just to kind of make it a bit more green, so that when you do the green highlights they don't stand out so much that they look out of place. So talking a little bit about colour theory, I learned a lot from the book Colour and Light by James Gurney. I found that book to be absolutely indispensable and essential to me as an artist. I learned so much from it, and not just about colour and light, but also just about painting certain subjects, painting trees and things like that. I try to think a lot about complementary colours when I'm mixing, because you want to work more with complementaries than anything else, because mixing two complementaries together like yellow and purple will create a chromatic grey, and a chromatic grey is basically a grey that's not been created with black and white, it's been created with colour. So it means the light that reflects off the particles of pigment, they vibrate off each other and create this really interesting grey instead of just a flat grey mixed with black and white. It's in those greys that you find a lot of colour variety and variation, and that's what creates interest in your painting. I actually struggled a bit with this mix. I think I actually in the end leaned a little bit more towards the blue than the green in the sky than I wanted to, but it turned out alright in the end. I think I was just, at this point, I'd been painting for, an hour, and I was just kind of powering through. I was really enjoying it, and I was just trusting my gut and letting myself kind of paint how I wanted to paint at the time. I'm so much happier with the shape of the tree in this painting. I feel like it just looks more authentically Australian, like a gum tree. For me, it looks more like the trees that I see around my home, whereas the other one almost looks like a gum tree trying to be an oak tree. A little bit, but you know, we try. Sometimes when you get so caught up in the painting and the process, you lose some of your initial vision, and your painting sometimes loses a little bit of its quality, but it's still fun to paint. Just trying to carve out this trunk a bit more. This bluey grey is a similar bluey grey to the ones that I used in the trees in background, or that kind of like that mid-tone that you see on the background hills. And I used this to paint in some of the branches that, you know, might look further away than the darker trunk and darker branches, and also to just kind of give an impression of the branches of another tree to the left-hand side. So I decided there wasn't enough definition in the kind of mid-ground and foreground, so I added in some shadowing, which is probably a little too dark now that I look at it, but it kind of all comes together in the end. So I've mixed a bit of lemon yellow with some yellow ochre and some warm yellow, which I think is like a cadmium yellow hue, to get these highlights. I think I also used some warm cadmium red hue as well, just to kind of bump down the intensity of the yellow a little bit so it's not so fluorescent. I feel like yellow can really easily become gaudy and make your greens not necessarily not believable, but very bright, and that's not always the look that you want in your painting. I know I want my paintings to be quite serene and calming and atmospheric. And just like that, we have finished another couple of paintings. Overall, I'm fairly happy with how they both turned out. I do wish I hadn't overworked the tree in the top painting so much, but you live and you learn. So please like, subscribe, drop a comment, let me know what you think, and I will talk to you soon.